Alright guys, welcome to tutorial number 1 for GameMaker Studio. What I'm going to do today, I'm going to walk through a very simple project. Basically going to show you how to make the little intro game that I made in the last video. With the little the scrolling clouds and the smiley faces. You probably remember it from the last video. So the reason I'm starting that super low level is because that project will basically take us through the four basic sort of building blocks of any given game in GameMaker, and it'll take us through. It'll basically explain to you, if you're coming into the software for the very first time, how GameMaker works, how all these elements actually fit together to create a game. So I want to go through that and make it as sort of as clearly as possible what all these kind of elements are and how they interact with each other, so that you have a starting point and you kind of understand what the hell is going on when I'm doing stuff in later tutorials. So you'll have to bear with me if you already know all of this kind of crap. But yeah, I am basically just going to start super basic with this. So go ahead, start a new project, call it whatever you want. I'm just going to call it tutorial 01, I guess we'll do, and hit create. Won't save the changes to my last thing. Then when it saves out that, it'll create over here a blank project explorer for you. The project explorer is basically where all the different elements and resources of your game are kept, so all your sprites and sounds and objects and stuff are all kept in this area of the screen. You'll be able to find pretty much everything to do with your game over here. The project we're going to be starting with today is basically going to walk us through 4 of these sort of major categories and show you how they kind of work together. So we're going to look at sprites, we're going to look at backgrounds, objects, and rooms all together. We're going to start off with rooms, so go ahead and right click on room and go to create room. What a room is, rooms are basically the levels, or I suppose a better term is the screens of your game. So like your menu might be a room, your save game screen might be a room, and every level of your game might be a room. They're basically sort of big containers for all of your objects and backgrounds. So this is our very first room over here. It's totally blank at the moment. We can click this, get rid of this this grid we've got going on. And yeah, it's just a big empty grey room by default, 640 by 480. If we go to settings over here, we can set the name of the room. While I set this, I'm going to say something about naming conventions. It's very important to give all the objects and resources in your game sensible names, so that when you're referring to them in code, it makes things a lot easier and just makes everything a lot more organized and a lot easier to deal with. You'll probably ignore this advice a little bit for a while, and then you'll start to see why I gave it in the first place when your project becomes like a total mess of different objects that have the same name as each other, and you get naming conflicts and all that kind of stuff. So what I tend to do for naming conventions is I'll write a 2 or 3 letter acronym that sums up the type of object I'm using, and I'll use that same acronym for every object of that type, and then I'll put an underscore and then just a name that makes sense to me with no capitalization throughout, so that everything is consistent. So for rooms, I use RN, which I've already typed, underscore, and say that this is level 1 of our game, I guess, so we could just call it level 1, I guess. Or actually, so, we're gonna make that sky thing. We'll call it the sky room. So this is the room, sky room. So if we hit tick just to save that out, and you can see it's changed the name of the room there. Open it up again. We go to settings, and we can see over here as well, we've got the width and height settings. These, for now, all you really basically need to know is this is the number of pixels in your room. So if you change this to say 1024, you can see in real time how that's made the room a lot wider than it was before. We'll leave it at that. We'll have a big widescreen scrolling clouds room, and the height over there is obviously the same thing. We're not going to change that because my background clouds don't seam vertically, so they only seam horizontal. They're only seamless when they scroll horizontally. So we're going to leave the height at that. Speed, a very important value actually. Sets the frame rate, or the target frame rate at the very least of your game, which determines the rate everything runs at in terms of the number of frames per second. So what that also means later on when you do some coding and stuff is that everything most things in your game will revolve around what's called the step event, which is an event which happens every single frame of your game. So when something's moving, it moves a little bit every frame, or and so on and so forth. And the reason that means your frame rate is important is because those events are going to run that many times a second, and it will give you an idea of how timing and everything is going to work in your game. So, but for the most part, I'm getting ahead of myself a bit on that. All you really need to know, or all you really need to do at this point, is set this to a sensible figure. If you play games, 60 FPS is a pretty sort of standard sort of target. So if you set your speed to 60, it's a fairly sort of smooth speed, for your eyes to look at and all that kind of stuff. So 60 FPS. So that's rooms. Next thing we're going to do is look at backgrounds. So if we go to backgrounds, right click and hit create background, we'll create a new background. Again, we want to give this a sensible name, just as we did with our room. So we're going to call it BG underscore sky, or BG underscore clouds, I guess, because that's basically what they are. What a background is, actually, before I load it, is basically a static image for your game that doesn't have sort of any interaction or sort of mobility for it. So while sprites and stuff are used for objects that animate and move around and can be controlled and stuff, backgrounds are for things like clouds, for example, or anything in the game that, while they can be manipulated and moved around in sort of limited sense by the code, they're mostly for things that are static and don't have any real sort of interactivity. So if we go to load background, we can use an image I made earlier, which is this seamless clouds. You've seen it before if you've seen the last video. Just a seamless image, seams horizontally, so it can scroll horizontally. I'm going to show you how to do that right now, actually. So if we hit OK, and we'll come back to our room. Now we've got BG clouds in our Project Explorer. We've got two things now. I'll just go back in backgrounds. We've got BG clouds, rooms. We've got room sky room. So you can see how the project is starting to sort of take some shape, and that's how sort of the project is structured. All your stuff is over here. So to set that background, we go to our room, we go to backgrounds, and we're on background 0. You want to take visible when room starts. That just, exactly what it says on the tin. It just means you don't have to turn the background on through code, which you might want to in some situations, but for now, you just want this background on all the time. So click visible when room starts, and then just pick the image you want to use. BG clouds. You can also set foreground images. That means they will basically show on top of objects and things in your game. So for whatever reason you might want a UI element or something to be a foreground image instead of a background image. But either way, you can see how it's already set by default to tile, horizontally and vertically. I can show you it tiling vertically as well. If I set this 700, you can see how it's tiling down, but you can see it's not exactly seamless when it tiles vertically. So we'll leave that 480 for now, so it looks nice and pretty. Go to backgrounds again, and the other setting down here we want to set is horizontal speed, which is basically just an automated way of making the background scroll. Super useful. You can make it scroll diagonally by setting vertical speed. If we set horizontal speed to 1, and we just save actually real quick and run our game, and finally there we go, we have our scrolling clouds. So as you can see, here they are scrolling at a nice 60 FPS. They're scrolling, and what I was saying before with that 60 FPS is that's basically it's running once this horizontal speed is moving your clouds at 1 pixel every frame of your game. So this is why it's very important to know what your room FPS and your target FPS sort of is, because it's basically running that code to move that 1 pixel every single frame. So basically you're going to be moving 60 pixels every second when you're running at 60 FPS. This isn't quite at 60 FPS, I don't think, because I'm recording this video at 30 FPS, so that might be having an impact as well, and it might be moving faster than this otherwise, but I think this is still looks kind of right to me, so I think it's okay. So as we can see, we have our scrolling clouds there. If we wanted to move it in the other direction, well, we can do. The horizontal speed by default, it sets the value to how much it moves to the right. So if you set this to a negative value, we'll say it's -2, for example, and then run the game again, you can see it's scrolling left at a much faster, at twice the speed that it was scrolling right, because it's at -2. And yeah, that's pretty much all there is to it. You can make it move diagonally. I mean, this will look terrible because it doesn't seam properly. By just setting a horizontal speed and a vertical speed, you can see it's scrolling scrolling vertically. So if we just set that back to a sensible value, make it just scroll one to the right. So that's backgrounds, pretty much the most basic level. We'll cover like placing tiles and stuff another time. But basically that's all you need to know about how to make the scrolling background. So we're going to move on to sprites. So a sprite is basically a visual element of your game for anything that's like animated or like is controllable or interactive. We'll probably be using a sprite. So right click on sprites and go to create sprite. Give it a sensible name as we did with everything else. This is just going to be those little smiley dudes from before, so I'm just going to call it SBR_smile. Go to edit sprite, and this is the sprite editor, where all the frames of like a given animation will be shown. A sprite contains basically one animation, like a set of frames basically. That's probably the best way to think of a sprite, is a set of frames, and you know, they're what you need to create objects and stuff with, like for your characters and things like that. So if we go ahead and make a new sprite in here, I'm going to edit it, and we're just going to very quickly throw together as quickly as I can in this tool the little smiley face from before. Make those eyes a bit bigger, make them super happy. There we go. If we drag this out for space, get that yellow again. There we go. Get some more black actually, and do this. There we go. Super happy sprite. Looks super happy, and basically that shows you image 0 there. What that means is that's like the very first frame of the sprite. So I mean, if we add more in here, you can see how it's creating like an animation and showing you like the result of that animation over here. You can play that back at a specific speed. Make sure to set that like to the speed that your room is at, so you can see exactly how it'll look when it's actually in your room. We don't actually need any animation for this dude at the moment though, so we're just going to leave it at that and hit tick. Some other very important options in here, which I will cover. I'll cover the collision stuff in a later tutorial. Origin is very important, and I'll basically cover that, you know, after we've gone through objects and I show you how to put these smiley faces into your room. I'll show you what the origin does and why that's important. But for now, go ahead and click OK, and we have our sprite smiley face. Now we need to basically assign that smiley face to an object that we can actually place in the room, because at the moment that's just an image. It doesn't mean anything by itself. It's not placeable. It's just an image resource that other objects can use to display themselves. So we're going to look at objects now. So go ahead, right click on objects and go to create object. What an object is, objects I suppose are pretty much the most important element of your game. They're basically the containers for all of the interactivity and like controls and like characters and stuff in your game. All come from objects. So we're going to just make an object to represent our little smiley guy. So we're going to call this obj_smile. You can see now where the naming convention becomes handy, because we have the sprite for smiley face and we have the object, and we need to be able to tell them apart. So, you know, putting the type on the beginning helps you learn that this is the sprite and this is the object, which is very important when you're in code. And like, say you want to move, like if you had these named the same thing, for example, you wouldn't be able to do something like move smile by 5 or something like that, because they wouldn't know what you were referring to, the sprite or the object. So it helps you out, and it's very important to have these good naming conventions. So we'll call this obj_smile. We've set its sprite to SBR_smile. And so now we have the basics of an object. So actually we're going to click OK and save that out, objects_smile. Go back to our room, go to objects, and we click object to add with the left mouse as our object editor, and click object smile. Sorry, not the editor, it's the object placement even. We can use this to place these smiley guys all around our room. What's cool in GameMaker Studio now is that you can set a lot of like base properties of these sprites within the object placer. So I can set this to be a particularly huge version of this sprite, for example, and set it to have like a predefined offset like this, and move it around a bit like that. just with the left mouse button there. You can see all the different controls for like moving and adding objects, removing them, and like moving around your room are all listed here. So just take a few minutes to get used to those whenever you want. So right, now we have the objects in the game. We can actually run that. Let me show you that. There we go. And there's our smiley faces, not really doing anything, but they're in the game. Those are our objects at the moment. So we'll go ahead and close that. What we want to do now is add the interactivity to the game. Well, just add, not really interactivity since you're not really interacting with those smiley faces, but make them rotate around and do that little fancy effect I had before. So first of all, I'm just going to talk a little bit about how objects do things in your game. They basically run off of these two big columns here, events and actions. What an event is something that happens in your game. So like the object just got created, the room just got created, the player hit the left mouse button, the player hit like A on his keyboard, a certain amount of time has passed, you know, basically any sort of condition or event that the computer can pick up and say, oh, this thing has happened, now I need to do this thing, which will be all of anything that you put into here, which is actions. So stuff that happens when events happen, and that's more or less the structure of how everything in your game works. So for example, I'm going to add an event, and I'm going to say, actually instead of a rotation, I'm going to, just so that it's slightly interactive, I'm going to add some keyboard stuff. I'm going to say every time we hit the right arrow key. So now we have an event up there, a keyboard event for the right arrow key. So every time we press the right arrow key, everything that's in here will happen. So I mean, we can place various different actions. So I mean, we could set it to like scale the sprite or move the sprite around when we press the right mouse button. So if I set like every time you press right, move freely in direction, I can't remember now exactly how directions work. I think direction 0. Think that might be right. I can't remember. It has some sort of arbitrary system of degrees for direction where like it's 360 degrees, and once you work out where it starts, it's easy to work out what direction it is. But we'll say 0 for now, whatever direction that happens to be. Let's say move 2 every time you press the right mouse button. So let's just see what that does when we run our code. Now, so we have all these objects here, and if I press the right arrow key, ta-da! They're all moving to the right. I only had to tap it once, and they will move like that forever. Because that's pretty much all I told it to do, is when I press right, start it moving towards the right. We can make it move like strictly like one space to the right, like with different actions, but I'm also going to just show you how to basically do that through code. If we go to control over here and go to code, and this little bit of script here is just execute a piece of code. This is pretty much the most powerful form of functionality you can have in GameMaker. It allows you to do pretty much any of the actions over here if you know how to write them in the coding language in GameMaker, along with a bunch of things that you just frankly can't do with these drag and drop actions over here. These will get you quite far for a while, but I honestly recommend just starting to dive straight into code. And like, I mean, there's hundreds of resources out there. I'm planning to teach a lot of this sort of coding stuff as well, but yeah, I honestly recommend getting into the coding as quickly as you can, because it's just, honestly, I find it easier to work with. Like, it's so annoying when you can't find the exact right thing that you want to do through these actions over here, when you know you can just write a couple of lines of code that will do it all for you. So, for example, I mean, this might just like blow your mind entirely, and you have no idea what I'm doing here, but I'm just going to write a piece of code that moves you to the right by like 2 pixels every time, whenever you're holding the right arrow key. So we already know that you're holding the right arrow key because that's our event, so we don't need to write like an if statement or anything like that. So all we're going to do is take our x coordinate, which is x, and type plus equals, which means to add to x, 2. Pretty much that's all there is to it. That will move us 2 pixels to the right whenever we're holding, right, there's different ways you could write that. You could say x equals itself plus 2, but the easiest way to do it is to do what I just did, which is, you know, plus equals, which adds 2. I mean, you can do things like minus equals to take away and all that kind of stuff. All of that code will be covered later, and is covered by like the help menus in GameMaker and all that kind of stuff. So basically, that's what that line of code does. So if we hit tick now, we've replaced our action earlier with this little bit of code, and if we run that now and we press right, whenever we're pressing this button, it's moving us two pixels to the right every frame while we're holding the button. While we're not holding the button, it's not doing anything. It's pretty nifty. So you can set up events like that for left, up, and down, and you can pretty much imagine from that how you get forward directional movement. Obviously, to move in the Y direction, you would just pick Y, X and Y coordinates, you know, to move up and down. To move left instead of right, you would obviously just subtract 2, which is going to be a bit weird, me pressing right to move left, but yeah, that's how that happens. And so yeah, that's the very basics of how interactivity and stuff works. Just to finish off, just to create what we had in the intro video, is I'm going to delete this event, and I'm going to add what's called the step event. Very important event for me to actually cover what this does is this event will run regardless every single frame of your game as long as the object exists. While the object is in your game and frames are happening, so 60 frames a second, you know, frames are pre-processed by the game. Every single one of these frames, the actions in here will be carried out. So if we go to code now, for example, if we did the same code, x plus equal 2, hit the tick and hit F5, we'll see that they're just moving to the right by themselves now, because every single frame of the game they're moving right 2 pixels. So if we want the object to do what it did in my intro game, was to do image underscore angle. You actually probably, if you watch the video, you see me writing this code right at the start of the video. But if we type image angle plus equal, add 1 for now, plus equals 1. What that does is very similar to what we just did before, where we wrote x plus equals 1. We changed the x property of the object to be enhanced by 1 every time, and now we're just changing the angle of the object to be added 1. If we put -1, it would rotate it in the other direction, you know. So image angle plus equal 1. So what that should do now, hopefully, is we see our objects rotating. We even see our massive one rotating. So that's pretty much it, really. That's covered all the sort of basic elements of putting very simple games together in GameMaker. Obviously it doesn't show you how to do a complete game, but it does show you pretty much all of the basic elements of a project in GameMaker, and how sprites interact with objects, and how objects execute functions, and how they get their interactivity, how to make a room, how to set up backgrounds, and all that kind of stuff. So now that you know all the basics, I can go into actually doing some game projects and that kind of stuff in my future videos. But for now, I just really wanted to cover all this basic stuff, and basically get everyone on the same page in terms of how stuff's going on, so no one is totally left in the dark when it comes to, you know, why I'm doing the things I'm doing later on. So yeah, thank you for watching, guys, and I'll see you on the next episode.